We're back. I couldn't be more pleased to say, joined once again by an old friend and very much admired member of the House of Representatives. He is Congressman Mike Turner. He serves on both the House Armed Services Committee and on its Intelligence Committee. On the Armed Services Committee, he is the chairman of the Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee and a very influential and leading member of the House of Representatives on national security issues more generally. Congressman, welcome back. It's very good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you for having me, Frank.
You have been at the forefront of those who have been concerned about the threat that is emerging from Iran, of course, in a variety of different fashions, the terrorist threat, the subversion, the ballistic missiles, but also the nuclear weapons. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the so-called deal that is now beginning to take shape, much less concretely than one would like at this point, and your thoughts about how the Congress is likely to deal with it.
Well, I think this the proposed deal is very dangerous. One, it's based upon an assumption that Iran actually does comply with the agreement. And the second aspect of the agreement that's troubling is that the limitations on Iran are insufficient to be able to hold Iran at bay as an emerging threat to the continental United States and to its neighbors. And with respect to the trust aspect, I mean, anything that we've ever known about Iran's program, we have found out through intelligence sources. It's not been any aspect of Iran participating in the international community, declaring their sites, allowing access to their sites, or complying with the treaties that Iran has been subject to. To make the leap that a country that is a major sponsor of terrorism, that covertly operates throughout the Middle East and has declared itself an existential threat and adversary to both the Israel and the United States is just unthinkable. The second aspect of this deal is that it does not limit Iran's ICBM program or its missile program that threatens its neighbors or the United States. So Iran will be free to fully over the next decade develop an ICBM that would reach New York or Washington, D.C. And as we all know, people don't develop ICBMs for conventional weapons. So clearly it would be an issue for them to get to the point where they threaten us. The second aspect of the limitations not being sufficient is that they're going to be able to continue to enrich, continue to expand their overall knowledge, and place themselves in a situation where they're going to be a threat to their neighbors in the United States.
Against this backdrop, and I couldn't disagree with anything you've said. In fact, worry very much that we've sort of indulged in this illusion that somehow we're going to compartmentalize these threats. What do you make, Congressman Mike Turner, of the prospect that the president would give, in addition to something on the order of $12 billion that has flowed or will by the end of June, to the Iranian regime, another $50 billion by way of a signing bonus on this agreement? Knowing what you do, is there any chance that money will be used for purposes other than intensifying this very problematic behavior in all of the areas you've described, including the nuclear one?
Well, absolutely. And you have a regime that already is undermining all of its neighbors and is seeking weapons of mass destruction. Giving them greater economic opportunity is only going to fuel that. And they're destabilizing Lebanon, what they're doing now in Yemen, throughout the entire region. They pose a threat, and giving them additional resources will only be put to their adventuresomeness.
And emboldening them, really, as well. Among the other things that we have to worry about is evidently in the sort of environment in which sanctions are coming unraveled, is the insertion by the Russians at long last, apparently, of advanced air defense missiles, the so-called S-300s. What does that imply, Congressman, in terms of the further danger that this government will represent to us and further limitations on our ability, to say nothing of the Israelis, to do anything about it?
Well, I think it certainly also shows the greater willingness from Russia to support Iran, as Iran is not within the international community, not within the the international norms. For Russia to say now that they're receiving pressure for their own violations of international law with Ukraine and their other neighbors, their nuclear investments that they're making that violate the INF Treaty, there will be this military sharing and alliance with Iran that I think does pose, as we look to the future, even a greater threat.
You have been one of the champions in the Congress on missile defenses, Congressman Mike Turner of Ohio. You have helped, I think, establish that even before this Iranian threat metastasizes further, that this is an urgent requirement. I wonder, particularly in connection with your responsibilities on the House Armed Services Committee, how seriously you take evidence that we're now looking at missile threats, perhaps in the not-too-distant future from second and third-order countries as well, but certainly today from Russia and China, involving things like hypersonic or at least supersonic and even maneuvering warheads. What does that mean for our missile defenses, and should we be doing more in that area?
Well, it certainly poses a difficulty in the issue of missile defense, and I think our investment in directed energy has been thwarted, I think, and we really need to pump that up. There's such great opportunity. What we have learned in missile defense, where we've had to put a bullet on a bullet, the architecture, the algorithms, the geometry, is a significant foundation where we do have the ability to take missile defense to the next step. Where with directed energy, we would have an ability to overcome countermeasures, follow and target numerous times the incoming dangers. So I do think that we are in a situation where we have to shift. I just met with Netanyahu and asked him at the end of their very successful deployment of the Iron Dome. I had worked with Israel pre-Iron Dome deployment, and then had returned at the time when it was being deployed. And what are the lessons learned? He said, "Well, the lessons learned is that the threat is evolving, and our missile defense systems have to evolve." And that I think is the real message as we look to the oncoming threats, is that we have a base of knowledge. We now have to take it to the next level.
And we need a president who understands the necessity of doing so, rather than dismantling, as you mentioned, in the directed energy space, the capabilities that have begun to be brought to fruition. Congressman, let me just ask you in closing, you have, of course, just presided over the markup of the Defense Authorization Bill, the so-called National Defense Authorization Act. Is there anything in that legislation this year that you're particularly pleased about and think that the rest of us ought to be aware you've accomplished?
I think probably the most important aspect of the National Defense Authorization Act this year is that we will avoid sequestration. The sequestration has been devastating to our military. It has affected readiness. It has put a environment of uncertainty on our military. And through the budgetary process and then through this National Defense Authorization Act, we will be able to fund the priorities of the military with certainty, without them having to second guess, okay, we have these resources now, what's going to happen as we go through the budgetary process or sequestration. We're at least going to avoid it for this year, which will be fiscal year 2016, and I think fund the priorities to give the military the ability to start recovering from what have been massive cuts and great uncertainty.
And those cuts, I think it's unmistakable. We had one of your colleagues, Congressman Rob Whitman, on earlier in the week talking about the readiness of our forces, and I'm sure you're seeing this in the tactical air and land forces arena as well, are unmistakable in terms of their degradation of our military capabilities, and I can only imagine are contributing to these calculations by the Iranians on the one hand, the Russians, Chinese, and others, that this is a moment in which they can act, if not with impunity, with minimal chance that there will be real penalties associated with their misconduct. We have to leave it at that, I'm afraid. Congressman Mike Turner, again, your work in the Armed Services Committee, on the Intelligence Committee, and in the Congress more broadly on these national security matters is tremendously appreciated, of incalculable importance. I suspect you don't get thanked nearly enough for it, but we appreciate you coming by from time to time to allow us to do it, because thanks to you are really very warranted. Next up, we will be speaking with Bill Gertz. We'll take stock of what's going on inside the ring with him. Straight ahead.